For this assignment, we're going to do a series of small individual still life paintings of fruit or vegetables, whatever you would like to do. They're going to be on a very small piece of paper. They're about 7.5 inches by 5.5 inches, and they'll be in your portfolio. So the first thing you have to do is acquire some fruit or vegetables. So whoever does the shopping in your family, make sure that they bring home some apples, pears, lemons, limes. I've got a little bit of a lot of things right here. But you can also do carrots, onions. I've painted mangoes, different things. But find a few objects. You need to have 4 to turn in. And I've given you at least 5 sheets of small paper. And you can always paint on the backs also if you decide that you need to have a new piece of paper to work with. So I love to pick out my own fruit because I like to have the stems. I think the stems on it make it a little bit more interesting, but you can always paint things in that aren't there. I have a pear right here that has a fairly interesting blemish on it. It's just a dry spot where it was probably against a branch or something like that. Well, when I set this up, I'll just paint around it. I'll just imagine that it's smooth and just let the colors that I'm working with continue on down. Or you can put it, of course, away from you. This one just happens not to like to sit up flat, so I just roll it over on that blemish and lay it on its side rather than on its end. I like to do Granny Smith apples. Sometimes they'll have a red blush on them like this one. There's a lot of different types of red apples. I'm not a big fan of red apples to eat, and so I usually buy whatever's the cheapest. Lemons are nice to paint and draw. But just have something that you can work with, and that's where you have to start. When I first started giving this assignment, I would bring all types of fruits and vegetables into the classroom and spread them around on the tables, and the students could kind of trade them off. But what I found originally was that people would do these terrible little paintings. It's like, oh, done with that one, give me another one type attitude. And so I actually went back and I said, you have to do this completely from the beginning again. And so what I'm looking for is for each of these little still lifes to be an actual little piece of art. So I've actually have a stack of these that I've matted, and so a couple of pears here, lemons and limes, and here's a red apple of some sort, probably a gala. Now you'll notice one of the other things that I started saying is you have to do a background. I want you to add the cast shadows, and you have to do something with the background. And when you look at my backgrounds, they're very, very simple. What I would do is, like, I would pick a color that was related to the actual object. So here I've got a little bit of probably a sap green with a little bit of yellow involved, and I'd very quickly take a broad brush and just brush out. Same thing with the front here. You see the shadows here. And when you're doing shadows, shadows aren't black. Shadows there's so much cast or reflective light around that they're usually a little bit lighter. And so a gray or a slate blue or something like that is a much better choice for the shadows than black. Here I just took a little bit of yellow and brushed it out. You can see the brush strokes. They're just very simple. And they're emanating from the actual object, and so by the time you get out here, it's just white paper. Just a couple of apples together, a red and a Granny Smith. Here's one where I actually use some darker tones for the shadows. I actually like them better when I use just the yellows and the greens. Here's some other examples. Just simple little still life. And you can put one object in it, or you can put two objects in it. This is the one that I'm working on right now, and so we'll get to work on these. This is the view that I have of the pears in my still life. After this, we'll be using the document camera, so you'll be seeing it from above. When you find a place to sit down and work, it's ideal if you can have a single light source. And so what I set up is I have the overhead light turned off, but I have a lamp over on my far right. And that gives me a very directional situation as far as light source. So the shadows that are cast are very well defined. That's not always going to be the easiest thing to do. If you can open up the shades for a window or something like that, that will give you a fairly nice directional light source. But quite often you're in a space where there's lights all over the place. And so sometimes you'll have multiple light sources. And if that's what you have to work with, you can. Just realize that sometimes you'll have to kind of figure out where the strongest shadow is as a cast shadow and use that and ignore all the other shadows. First thing I want to do is look and see if there's any spots where the lights are very strong. I've got my light turning down. If I tilt it up a little bit, now I've got a few more spots that you can see where the light's shining. And what I'm going to do is start off by finding those spots and kind of making a mark on, drawing them out on my paper. This one doesn't have much. Those are spots that you have to leave dry if you want them to remain white. Okay? Now there's a couple things you can do. You can start by mixing up paint and simply starting to apply the paint. It's more of a dry brush technique. You can also, if you want, cover the entire object with water and then start moving the pigment in and seeing how that works. And I'm going to do that on this one a little bit. I'll start over here. And I'm going to make sure that I leave that one highlight dry. And I'm not really getting it super wet, just a little bit. Now in watercolor, what we want to do is start with the light colors and then follow up with the darker colors, which is the opposite from oil painting. With oil paints, because they're opaque, we start with the darker colors, and so your bright highlights like white and light colors, you add those at the very end. Well, you can't do that with watercolor because it's transparent. It won't cover up everything. Now from my vantage point, I'm seeing things a little bit different. The camera that you're seeing is looking straight down, whereas with me, I'm looking, into it. So I can see things a little bit differently than what you can see on the screen. But I've got some really dark spots back here, but yet it lightens up as it comes near the bottom because of all the reflective light. The light's bouncing off the tabletop and coming back up. So I'm going to start taking a little bit of Vermilion, and I'm going to darken this side over here. Okay. Now always be sure to keep a paper towel close to you to dry off and clean your brushes. And also, if you need to test your colors, test them on the white paper towel and then bring it over. Okay, I'm going to leave those alone for a little bit. I need to strengthen the values over here on this side. Now I can still work with water to move the pigment around a little bit. Now after this dries, I actually have a cast shadow that's on this pair being cast off of this first pair. But I'm going to wait until that's dry, and because that's kind of a crisp line, and if I paint it on right now, it'll spread out all over the place, and that's not what I want. Okay, so I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow, I think. I'm going to paint this edge right up here. And then I'm going to have a fairly intense shadow where the pear turns into the stem. So I'm going to wait on that and wait till everything's a little bit drier and paint that in. So that's my first pear. Okay, I've painted in the other pair. I've also put the light undercoat for the stems in. So as this is drying, I'll come back to this one. And you can see where I've darkened in the back sides of the stem, where the shadows are and everything. I've got the shadow here being cast by this pair, and I've drawn out the shadows that are on what we refer to as the cast shadows. And so now what I've done is I've taken some ultramarine blue, added a little bit of black to it, and then thinned it way down with water. And that's what I'm going to use for my shadows. So it's kind of a slate blue, a slate gray blue. And so now I'm going to come along here. And as I look at this, there's a little bit of a shadow that comes along here. And this shadow extends past the pair on this side. And then the shadow for this one is over here. I didn't want the shadows to be very dark, so that's why I add so much water to it. And this is reminiscent from your color wheel and value chart, where you took, on the value chart, you took a color and you kept adding water to it until it was very, very thin and very light. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for just a little bit before I do the background, just to make sure that I don't have problems of cross-contamination. Okay, I've thinned down the shadow color, kind of the slate blue, and so now I can come in here and just put little strokes of blue down. It's very thin. Now I think I'll take the yellow and maybe do the same thing. Once again, I want it very, very thin. I think I'll start on this side. I just want to give a hint of color in the background. I'm going to leave this side white since the shadows are going this direction, and I'll keep this side a little bit darker. Okay. And I'm done.